Thank you for joining me today, Carl. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, super excited to have it, Phil. Thank you.
And before we start, I just want to say I love the idea of doing things to for financial conversations. I think I told you in the past, like your podcast, The 50 Fires, I played
Mm.
some of those in the car with my wife, and it's
Mm.
really made for some good conversations. And I think that this book can do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of settled into the idea that that's what my work is now about. It's not about sketches, it's not about books, it's not about podcasts, it's about conversations, right? And all of those sort of serve to help us have more of them in the world.
Yeah, and we just don't have enough. And so I think it's really
It's
great.
true. It's true.
And it's a really great process when you have those conversations. You learn so much.
Yeah, and um, it's often hard and challenging. So that's we gotta kind of stick with it. Give
Yes.
ourselves permission to be clumsy. Don't tap out. I almost tapped out of a conversation we were having as a family around money this last week. And it was the hardest thing I could do, to stay in the conversation and not be offended and not feel guilty or not be defensive. And I'm actually really proud of myself that I was able to stay in it and not tap out, because they're hard, but it's the only way. I think a really good relationship with money happens in conversation, right? So we need to
Yeah.
have them.
Yeah, I know I had one. I have, I'm a registered life planner and I have my life plan. And there's an element of our life plan, which is to create a scholarship for when we go back to school later in life. And every year, at the end of the year, like in December, we have this conversation about where are we going to make donations to this year that we haven't yet. And at the end of last year, it happened for the second time, and my wife never mentioned the scholarship. And it was bothering me, and it was bothering me. And then we were away together in February, and it was my birthday, and I said, this is the time I'm going to bring this up. And I brought it up, and like she hadn't realized it hadn't connected. And then when we had the conversation, now it's okay, and she gets it. But we sometimes we just sit with those thoughts inside our head and never do anything about them.
Yeah, I think that's particularly interesting around money, just because like at its core, it is just zeros and ones stored in a cloud. But what we tend to do, and what you're pointing to, is like we build up all these big stories around things, and in the absence of information, we will certainly create a narrative. And money is nothing more than zeros and ones with a giant pile of stories on top of them, right? And I think it turns out, your wife may just not have thought about it. Like it slipped her mind, and it was no less important. I know I can tell these stories about like they just don't care. I can't believe, don't they see how hard that I work and how important this is to me, and in absence of conversation, we'll continue to believe that story. And so interesting, once we bring it up, sometimes we may find out a difficult truth, but often we find out, especially if we bring it up in the right way, somebody says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that." Like there's immediate, if we can bring it up in the right way, there's often immediate empathy. If we can create empathy, then suddenly everything in the room changes. Instead of being defensive, we're saying things like, "Oh, how can I be helpful?" So yeah, I love that.
Thanks. And so I want to now turn to some of the sketches and chapters in your book that I really related to and talk to them a little bit more. So the first one is just the idea of real financial planning. And I'd like you to talk about that, and I'll ask you a couple questions.
Sure. Yeah, there's so for your viewers and listeners, there's this, think of it as a Venn diagram. It's two circles with a little bit of an overlap. And the circles are labeled your money, and one of the other circles labeled your life, and the overlap is real financial planning. And sometimes your money, there's a phrase, your money or your life. And sometimes it's seen as a choice. In fact, there's a great book, like I think one of the best books ever written about personal finance, by that title, Your Money or Your Life. And again, I want to emphasize, like, I think one of the best books ever written about personal finance. The only thing I ever sort of like, it just it sort of bothered me for, well, at this point, it would be 2 decades, the word or. And there was good reasons for it. And I agree with the reasons. And again, like the book is probably the best book I've ever read about personal finance. But I think there's an integration of the two, not a fight between the two, like not a choice. You choose your money or your life. In addition to the conversation about or, I think there's a really beautiful conversation to have around and, your money and your life. And I think that's where real financial planning happens, is the integration of money, the integration of the use of money. And maybe even a word I like a lot is alignment, or your alignment of your use of capital with what you say is important to you, right? To me, that's the never-ending process. Like refining that is the never-ending process of real financial planning.
Oh, absolutely. And like how you use your capital is so representative that I was exchanging emails with my sister this morning, and she's divorced, and she was telling me about a decision her ex made and what that meant. And I'm like, well, by his actions, right? That shows what's important to him, because it was related to his relationship with the kids and some concerns that she had. I'm like, well, he's showing what he thinks is most important, because this is how he's decided to act.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me, right? Like, what you're pointing to is revealed preferences say a lot more than stated preferences.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can be very sincere and intentional about our stated preference. Like for me, it's, more time with my family, mainly outside. That's my stated preference. And honestly, I think almost anybody who knows me well, if you ask them what's important to Carl, they would tell you time with his family, mainly outside. But if I look at my time, maybe I missed one of my long walks in the mountains, and I'm like, I just didn't have time this week. And then I go look at my screen time and I see I spent 3 hours on ESPN. Well, apparently ESPN's more important, or at least it was that week, than the time in the mountains. And I would argue that's just because I was no less sincere about time. It was just I made a series of choices that led there to be a misalignment of my use of capital time with what's actually important to me. And when I get that pointed out, I can now make some corrections. So it's not that, I would hope it's not that I know for me at least, it's not that I'm any less sincere or mean it any less when I say time with my family. Even if my actions don't show that, I don't mean it any less. It's just called being human. And the solution to getting more alignment is just practice, continual practice. Like, okay, I'm off track, I'm going to practice. So I think that's the way I think of that sort of issue of aligning our use of money, energy, time, and attention, the 4 sources of capital, which is another essay in the book, with what's really important to you.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that one too, because that one stuck out to me as well.
Yeah.
But before we do that, what would you say is the most harmful myth about financial planning, and how would you reframe that in plain English?
I think the most harmful myth is that I don't know, I think myth's probably still the right word. I think perception at the very least is that two is one, that it's a one-time event, right? That you go do financial plan. And the truth is that it's a never-ending process that you engage in. So there's a difference between a financial plan and financial planning, the ongoing process. And the second thing I think the financial services industry, speaking really broadly, and even the financial planning profession sometimes, just sort of by mistake almost, we can give people the perception that a financial plan is about delivering certainty. That this 2-inch thick book will tell you what the next 30 years of your life is going to look like. And the reality is, as much effort as we should put into that 2-inch thick book, or even like the 30-year line that's in the chart, we want to make that the best line we possibly can. And then we have to hold a competing truth in our minds at the same time, which is, and it will be wrong. All models are wrong. Let's just make sure this one's useful.
Right.
Just like a flight plan with a commercial pilot. They do detailed flight plans despite the fact that they know the flight will never go exactly according to the plan. So I think those both point to the same thing, which is this is a never-ending process, not an event.
Yeah, I know. I like to tell people that almost as soon as your plan is done, we know it's not going to be right, because not everything's going to work out the way. And that's why the way that you plan, and that's why we want to go back and revisit it and course correct along the way.